This episode is brought to you by the Command Presence Leadership Institute. Find out more by visiting commandpresence.net.
Welcome to the Faces of Leadership with Michael Warren. Be the leader you wish that you had.
Welcome again to the Faces of Leadership podcast, where we believe that leadership is about two things. It's about people and it's about actions. And we talk with leaders from across society who are stepping up to do what they can, where they are, with what they have. The question is, what can we learn from them? What can we learn from each other as we strive to be the leader that we wish we had? Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Warren, and I'm your host. Thank you for being with us today. As we get started here, I want to talk about this thing that we often talk about, that leaders should surround themselves with people who are smarter and more qualified than they themselves are. And now that's a pretty low bar here on this program with me as a host. But today we have really gone and we have outdone ourselves. Our guest today has worked in public safety since 2007 at every rank from officer to interim chief of police. And he remains a sworn part-time officer in Georgia today. He has served since 2023 as a program manager at the International Association of Chiefs of Police, also known as IACP, where he manages a portfolio of grant-funded projects that provide training and technical assistance to police agencies throughout the United States. He is a graduate of Northwestern University School of Police Staff and Command and PERF's Senior Management Institute for Police. He is also a master instructor and holds several specialty instructor certificates in use of force and de-escalation. In addition to his professional experience, David is an affiliate instructor and PhD candidate at Georgia State University, where his research focuses on the impact of police agency education and training requirements. He is a National Institute of Justice Lead Scholar and a doctoral fellow of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences. Please welcome David Snively to the show today. David, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I think the bio always makes me sound cooler than I am in real life, so I appreciate that. But
it's always good to sound cool. We got to take it where we can get it. You know what I mean? For our listeners, this is an audio podcast, but if you could see us right now, we were getting set up for the show, and we were talking about how people like us don't necessarily have to worry about headsets messing up the styling of our hair simply because there ain't much there.
Yeah, I'm doing what I can with what I got, but it's fleeting.
Hey, we talked about that, right?
That's exactly right. Whatever resources you've got.
Using them properly. As we get started here, I always tell people that the worst thing about being bald is that when it gets hot, I have no natural headband to absorb the sweat, so everything ends up in my eyes. So my response to that is just try not to sweat that much. But anyway, as we get started today, you started off in 2007 as a police officer in Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, so I'm always interested for people that rise up through the ranks and they get to the top position. The top position, though, is a little bit precarious to begin with, but when you add the word interim in front of it, I think it really makes it difficult for the person in that leadership position to fully perform their role simply because they have that little bitty word in front of it. What was your experience with that?
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right. So for me, I started in public safety as a 14-year-old police explorer. This was the only job that I ever wanted. Policing is the only thing that I ever wanted to do. And so it was sort of a natural segue. And so I started as an explorer, worked as an 911 dispatcher, worked then as a patrol officer, and worked my way up through the ranks across 3 police agencies, ultimately landing in a small city outside of Atlanta. And you're right, that interim title added a unique element. So I came into the organization as the deputy police chief. I was hired in as an external hire by a new chief. And we were at our hiring sort of given a task to set about making significant changes in the organization. And so sort of off the bat, right, you have these 2 guys who've come in from outside the organization, tasked with making changes. And so there's all sorts of encumbrances to that, right? People say the only 2 things that cops hate are the way things are and change. We were bringing change and changing the way things were. And so very shortly after, I guess about 6 months into that time frame, I became the interim chief. The chief who hired me moved back to Puerto Rico to be with family and to take over family affairs there. And that made me the interim chief. And so there's a unique space to navigate. I thought that we really did a fabulous job of growing and developing the culture that was in place. There were some phenomenally talented people there. I had the opportunity to recognize folks who'd been doing great work for a very long time, and I think sort of shine a light on some of the work that was being done before I got there. And we got to sort of say, hey, these are the things that we're going to celebrate. This is the culture we're going to promote. This is what we're trying to develop. And we accomplished a bunch of things. We did some really innovative things in hiring. We achieved full staffing in 2021, which was a big deal for police agencies. I guess it was in 2022. Big deal for an agency to be fully staffed in that time. And sort of started along this path. And so when I ultimately stepped away from that role, one of the things that you do is sort of look to see, I guess, to judge the significance of the impact you had is how much of that change remained, right? And many of the good things that I felt we had started and put in place remained. Sometimes we are limited not only by our own leadership, but by the leadership around us, right? Every police chief in the country answers to a mayor or to a city council or to a board. And so when we talk about leadership and when I talk with frontline officers about leadership in their organization, part of that conversation is remembering that it's not just the chief executive and just not maybe the top officer in their organization, but they might also be constrained by the politics or the political environment in which they're operating, right? And all of that poses unique challenges.
Well, I think it's interesting what you talked about there. Number one, and it doesn't matter what profession it is. Whenever somebody at the top is brought in from the outside, there are challenges for both sides, for the people who are already there and also for the person coming in. Because, and this is me, whenever I see, for example, an NFL head coach, and for whatever reason they leave, if I'm an assistant coach on that team, and they don't interview me, I think I'd get kind of upset because, I've been here performing. You've been able to watch me on the job. Quite honestly, you can ask me where I want to take this organization in the future, but you shouldn't be questioning my qualifications because you've had firsthand experience watching me. Speak about that if you would. How does a leader who is brought in from the outside, how do they handle? There has to be some resentment at some level. It may not be a lot, but how does a leader then brought in from the outside, how do they handle the resentment that may encounter from people who are in the organization who believe that maybe they should have had a chance at that job?
I think it's a great question. Yeah. And I would even go a step further and say it's not even just folks who are coming from the outside into an organization. I think sometimes it's also dealing with the resentment of peers who thought that they might have been more qualified or more deserving of the position that you got. And I think that, I think leadership comes down to the ability to develop relationships with people, right? And genuine relationships built out of a genuine concern for who people are personally and professionally. Against that backdrop, right, as a leader who's either new to a role or new to an organization, I think you have a responsibility, that leader has a responsibility to the staff to sort of meet them where they are and find out what they know. For me, coming into an organization, I was moving from the north side of Atlanta to the south side of Atlanta, different pace and type and style of calls for service, different resources, different training. And so the very first thing that I did was I worked in the office the first 2 days, which was long enough for me to go get uniforms. And then I spent the next 10 days and I worked straight across the weekend. I worked the next 10 days so that I could ride on patrol with every officer assigned in our patrol division. I spent at least 3 or 4 hours in the car with every member of our patrol division. You can't spend that much time in a police car with somebody and not have casual conversation, right? I didn't wear my stars. I wore an officer's badge and not the deputy chief's badge. I went to work with them. And within that very first night, I managed to get into a foot chase. Thank God I caught the person, right? Because I never would have lived that down.
Credibility right there, buddy.
Oh, jeez. But there's something about doing the work, right? Doing the work side by side with folks. And so pretty quickly, I had an instant credibility, right? Hey, okay, this guy knows how to be the police. And there were some problems that came out. People started sharing things that were going on in the organization, concerns that they had. Many of them were those sort of low-hanging fruit that I was able to act on right away. And so that got a little more credibility. It's okay, we told this guy a problem, he solved the problem. And so my experience is you can build relationships with people, and if you can help them solve the problems that are important to them, you start to get a leg up in that leadership journey. You start to get buy-in, you start to get trust. And that's the basis of all leadership. right? People buy into the leader before they buy into the vision, is the way John Maxwell puts it. And
Yes.
you got to give them a reason to believe in you.
It's interesting to me, going back to the NFL analogy, how little real quote unquote work the new coach gets done when they first join the organization, because it's basically spent observing and listening. They're listening to the players. They're listening to the veterans that have been there. They're listening to the assistant coaches. It really is intelligence gathering, because I think people do fear change. I think that's the way we're wired as human beings. Hey, this has kept me alive so far. So what I've been doing has been working. I think that before I'm willing to accept your change, I need to be sure internally that you have an understanding of the current situation. That when you come in and you make a change for the sake of making a change, that to me breeds distrust and not trust. So let me ask you this. You were brought in, so you're from the outside of the organization, and you said that you were brought in for the purpose of change. It's not like, hey, you know what, you're the chosen one that's going to be coming into the organization because things are going so well, and all I need you to do is stay the course. What unique challenges for a leader does it present when you're brought in to make changes with the understanding that people hate change?
Yeah, well, for exactly what you said, sometimes when you come in trying to make changes, one of the important things to remember is that the people in that organization are likely the ones who put that process in place or have at least continued it without changing it, right? And so I ask a lot of questions, and one of my questions is always, why do we do it this way? And I'm very upfront with folks. I say, look, when I ask a question, when I say, why do we do this? It's not a criticism. It doesn't mean that I think what you're doing is bad. I just want to understand why we do this. In my role at the IACP, when I arrived here, we had in my team of 7 people, we had 9 or 10 standing meetings every 2 weeks. 10 standing meetings in a 2-week period is a lot of meetings. And I just wanted to understand if they actually had purpose, right? So why do we have these meetings? There's only one wrong answer. The only wrong answer to the question is because that's the way we've always done it. That's one of the only things that really genuinely angers me. And I saw some folks, I had a lieutenant in my organization get very creative. I said one day, why do we do this? And he thought for a minute and he said, well, I suppose it's because nobody's ever thought of doing it another way. So, hey, I'll take that. That's better than because it's how we've always done it. Because that says some personal accountability.
Yeah, I would even prefer the answer, I don't know. Because
absolutely.
It's with an acknowledgement that I don't know, then, hey, you know what? Now let's go and investigate it. There's at least an acknowledgement that maybe we haven't been doing it the best way.
Yeah, that's right. And so beyond that, though, if you've got somebody who has said, hey, I want you to go in and make change, I want you to go in and share this knowledge or this expertise or this program, I think you just got to take ownership of that, right? The chief who hired me and I made no apologies as we came in. We said that we are here for the purpose of helping the organization. We're going to help each of you individually. We're going to make changes for the things that matter to you, but we're also going to make changes that affect the quality of police services that we're delivering to our community. And we made ourselves available, said we'll answer whatever questions you have about our approach. And look, make no mistake, my style of leadership was wildly different. I believe in developing relationships with people. I believe in treating people with compassion and as human beings, not as parts of machines. And there are many folks, particularly in policing, who came up sort of old style policing. That's not at all the way my career began. It's not at all the way most of us were trained. But it is the reality of the organizations that we work in now.
Based upon your experience, your exposure in your current position, would you agree that one of the biggest challenges for leaders as you go up the chain of command, that the farther up you go in an organization, the more difficult it is not to treat people as part of a machine? But because of that being farther removed from the individual, it's much easier to view them as something, a small piece in something much bigger. Because we talk about the leader needing the higher view, and I agree with that. But the higher view you can't become so high that you can't see the individual components below you.
Yeah, I broke one of my cardinal rules. I argued with somebody on the internet a couple of months ago. And
that's never frustrating, is it?
It's why I have the rule. It's why I don't argue with people on the internet. But the point that this person was making was, and it was a comment on another leader's post, a leader who I respect, and he had taught a class on leadership. And somebody commented on the post and said that, that he was a captain or a major in his agency and said, my staff needs to understand that I have their best interest at heart, but I see the bigger picture. And sometimes that means I'm going to put them in positions that are uncomfortable for them. And they've got to trust me. And I think that's true. However, you also have to acknowledge that employee is a person with hopes and dreams and ambitions, intrinsic motivations and things that they enjoy doing. And so as a leader, you have a responsibility to first have the relationship with the person. Does that mean that we're absolutely going to have to put them in assignments they don't like, either for the needs of the agency or because we want to grow and stretch them into a new position? Absolutely, that's the truth. And it doesn't mean they're always going to be comfortable. If they are comfortable, they're not growing. But you can only do that successfully if you have a basis of trust with that employee, so that the employee, him or herself, knows you have their best interest at heart, and so that you have a genuine understanding of what their goals are. If you put somebody to go run the traffic unit who has no interest in doing traffic policing, you've set that person up for failure. Right. And we'll call them a bad leader, or say they weren't successful, or say that they didn't have the agency's best interest at heart. And in fact, it's just a matter of putting that person in the wrong seat on the bus because you didn't take time to know what interested them most. I think there's a real nuance there. And I think some leaders lose that.
It's important to point out to me that trust is earned. You can't demand trust. That's something you have to ask someone's buy-in for. Just finished a book last week called Crucial Conversations. In that book, they talked about this manufacturing plant that historically had only run one shift, but they recognized that they had all this idle machinery that they were paying for, and that if they didn't start producing more, utilizing the machines more, that they likely weren't to survive. They put out the notice that they were going to implement a second shift. They got a lot of kickback from a lot of resistance from the workers. And when they sat down and had the conversation, it was because they believed that they were trying to maximize profits, is what the workers believe, because they're seeing it from their lens. Because listen, upper management's not coming in and working second shift, right? It's easy to demand that of people. But when they sat there and said, listen, this isn't a matter of making more profits, it's a matter of being profitable so we can stay in business, so that we can ensure you have your jobs. And once that conversation takes place, now the trust has been earned. And now we can work together to figure out what's the best way of implementing the change.
Yeah, and I think that's why transparency matters so much. And we hear transparency thrown around as a buzzword. And in public safety organizations, we talk a lot about transparency between the police and the community. But I think sometimes what's lost in that conversation is that internal transparency, right? Communicating to your own staff. And certainly you cannot claim to be transparent with the public, say, about police data, if you're not just as transparent internally about, say, your promotion processes or your selection process for a special unit, right? Those things go hand in hand. It's not something that you say, it's something that you do. We talk about police legitimacy and procedural justice. All of that has to exist inside the police agency. All of that has to exist between the police and police leadership and the line officers if you want that to then be replicated in the community. It's an essential piece of it.
I think that external legitimacy is a byproduct of being legitimate internally.
Absolutely.
And so then I'll ask you, put you on the spot here. Okay. You talked about transparency, but is there anything beside transparency that you believe, based upon your experience, could provide legitimacy internally? I think there's a lot of things that leaders can do to be seen as illegitimate, for lack of a better term. What's something that a leader, that if I'm a brand new leader, I can make sure that I do that is going to increase the likelihood that I'm seen as legitimate within the organization?
I think two things. One, I would say having direct, genuine conversation with the people you're trying to lead. And listen, I will share with you that this is not something that comes naturally to me. Left to my own devices, I would walk into work at 8:30 in the morning. I would go to my office, work 8 hours, and leave the building, right? Wave at people on the way in and on the way out. That's the way I'm wired. And so it takes deliberate effort for me to remember to do some of that management by walking around. Very literally, I had to set calendar appointments for myself that said, hey, go to the patrol building during this time, because our patrol officers worked in a different building. Go to the patrol building at this time. It's shift change. Be in the break room at this time. Hey, it's lunchtime. There'll be a lot of people making their breaks. I made myself appointments so that I got a visual reminder to go to those places to have a natural dialogue with folks. Because what happens then is you can start to foster this sense of collaboration. When people feel like they're contributing to the success of the organization, when they feel like they have a voice, even if you don't take their opinion, even if you don't take their advice, my experience has been that people want to feel like they're a part of the process. And so if you can genuinely engage them, now look, you can't go talk to them and pay them lip service and then wildly disregard what they said, right? But if you go and have those conversations and apply some of what you learn, or at least tell them why what they believe won't work, right? You clue them in on your perspective. All of that, I think, builds legitimacy in the organization, and it continues to build trust, and it deepens relationships.
I love what you said there, and I want to repeat it for our young leaders out there who are listening. Direct, genuine conversation. This cannot be a grin and nod section. They speak and yeah. And like you said, you go out and you do nothing. I mean, that if there is anything I can think of that destroys trust, it's that right there.
Yeah, that's right. If you're just, people, my experience has been they don't even want you to agree with them all the time. They just want to feel heard. And so you're right. There's a difference between pandering, right, and developing relationships and sharing information. It's great. It is great in both directions because it's such a great way for the leader to stay plugged into the reality of what's happening. We talk about sometimes middle managers or middle leaders watering down the message of the chief, right, and diluting the message. But it also gets watered down in the other direction, so that it may be that the deputy chief or the chief of police have this rosy view and think that everything's great because they're not getting that firsthand view, right? And so short of going out and doing the work alongside them, which we should come back to because I think that's a critical piece we should hit on. But short of doing that, just having recurring, genuine conversations with people where they know they can be authentic and just tell you the truth sets everybody up for success in all directions.
You talked about when you came to your current position, the number of standing meetings that were in place. Based on your experience, where is a leader more likely to get the real lowdown on what's going on? Is it informal, pre-scheduled meetings, again and again, or is it during those meetings that you have, I hate using this, out there, away from your office, out there with the front line, where once you gain the trust and you start having the informal conversations, which place are we going to find the most actionable, the most accurate reflection of what's going on?
The best connection that you get with folks is one-on-one. Even think you have to get outside the formal work setting, right? Calling folks into your office and having a dialogue isn't going to be as productive as going to their desk, and going to their desk isn't going to be as productive as going to lunch and grabbing a sandwich. There's something really unique about sharing a meal with folks. There's a reason why world leaders do that, right? There's a science behind it, but for our purposes, I think just going and showing that you're a human, right? I'm not a robot. I eat sandwiches too, or I eat sushi too, whatever it is. But for me, there's been a real magic in taking people to lunch, or even if you can't do that, then going to the coffee pot and sharing a cup of coffee, just having a one-on-one dialogue. I try not to make it formal. When I came to the organization, I had a formal hour-long meeting with everybody, and I asked really important questions. I asked, what are the things that we do well, and what are the things that you would change if you were in charge, and what sort of things does somebody need to succeed on our team? All of those great questions that they tell you need to understand, and all of those mattered. But then I started following up with short conversations, and those short conversations led to longer conversations, led to a lunch break. Hey, let's grab a bite on Thursday. And for me in this role especially, that was where I really got to the nuts and bolts of what worked and what didn't, and got some really innovative ideas about things that we could change and ways we could make a difference.
I remember back when I was a kid, and that was a lot longer ago than when you were a kid, but nevertheless, I still remember. I can remember some of the best conversations with my dad taking place when he had to go to the store to get something to do a job he was working on. And those car rides, unplanned, spur of the moment type things. Man, that's where the connections were made. And, sitting around the dinner table, that was another great place. But the intimate things took place in those environments where there was no pressure, there was nothing. It was just us. And I think that's what is often lost on leaders. Allow people to see you as a person. We already talked about how we need to see people as people, not as cogs in a machine. but allowing them to see you as a person, I think, is just as important in building trust.
I think that's true. And, in your story, I have to wonder if it was completely spontaneous or if he knew he was going to cover some of those topics with you. And that's it, right? I think sometimes, particularly if you're if you're a leader or an aspiring leader, and developing personal relationships with your coworkers is not something that comes naturally, right? You see these very outgoing, gregarious folks and you think, geez, I'm not like that, so I'll never be a leader. What I would say to them is that there's a huge degree of intentionality that goes behind being a good leader. I think that the best leaders are the ones who are aware that this is important and therefore make it a priority and invest in the relationships, invest in the conversations. It doesn't have to be, nobody's a born leader. I think you learn the skills over time. And this is a place where an aspiring leader can invest to make themselves better.
You talked about asking people to do things and take over positions and assignments that perhaps they were uncomfortable with. If people understand the why behind it, they're more willing to accept it. Hey, listen, what we need is there are organizational needs that have to be met. I wish it were different, but they aren't. So we have to meet those. But also, I need you to grow, and you can't grow if you stay in your comfort zone. But I think a lot of leaders, that they miss out on that because they're uncomfortable making others uncomfortable. I'm not saying, like Captain Sobel in Band of Brothers, he was trying to make people uncomfortable just because he was mean. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Making people uncomfortable for a particular reason requires you to be uncomfortable. Maybe young leaders aren't comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and I like the way that you explained that. I think it's one of the reasons that we avoid disciplinary conversations sometimes too, right? Or why we give discipline as the crap sandwich, right? We compliment them, and then we give the criticism, and then we compliment them again. Well, listen, if you give feedback in that way, you're a really good employee. The only thing they're going to hear is that bad thing that you said, in which case the compliments were worthless. Your problem employee, the one that you're really trying to counsel, they walk out of that meeting going, hey, I'm 2/3 good. 2 out of the 3 things he brought up were compliments, right? So we do that as leaders. We do that because of our own fear and our own discomfort. And I think a good leader, to your point, a good leader has to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And when you're doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons, and when you've already built trust with an organization, then that gives you the confidence and authority to walk in and have that conversation and say, hey, this is the right thing. And maybe you don't agree, but here's the vision that I see, right? Here's the context of the decision. And I think you get a lot of traction with folks. That was my experience. I had a leader who came to me. I had no interest in being a detective, didn't want to go. Never wanted. I loved being in uniform and thought I would promote just fine on that side of the house. And I had a leader who said, David, listen, you got to understand that there's a whole style of policing that you've never seen. And until you go to detectives and work major felony cases, you won't understand that perspective and you won't be as effective as a leader. And you've got to go learn that. And so because he had that conversation, right then I was willing to take that assignment. And it turns out, I think it was some of the best experience in my career. And I absolutely think I was a better leader as a result of having gone to the investigations division. But I never would have seen that perspective and if it hadn't been shared with me. So he did the thing. He stretched me. He challenged me. But he told me why first.
I think that really good leaders, they are able to see the future you perhaps even better than you. And again, I love sports analogies simply because I think people relate to them. But when a head coach talks about the potential of somebody they just drafted or the potential of somebody that they just signed, they're not talking about their person in their present state. They're talking about this future person. The truth of the matter is, it's very difficult for somebody at the bottom of an organization to see or trust in myself if my leader doesn't trust in me. That trust right there, that type of trust is something that I siphon from my leader and I use it for my advantage. And a good leader is willing to do that, is willing to give it that trust because they do see the future person.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. And I think that saying that out loud develops a confidence in that employee. Right. When I hear my boss say, hey, I trust you with this, right, or I respect you and I think you're going to do. And when we do that in big ways and small ways, we do it by telling the employee that we believe in them and that we trust their judgment. We also do it in small ways when we introduce them and say, hey, this is Lieutenant so-and-so, and he's going to take great care of you, right? Or when I say, hey, this is one of my best coordinators, she's going to do a fabulous job on this project. It's as much an assurance to the employee as it is to the customer, right? It's just as much me telling my employee, I trust you, that you're going to do a great job. And I trust you so much that I'm going to publicly tell people that you're going to do a great job. It's sort of speaking it into existence.
It's like the leader who recognizes that they have somebody in their organization that is better at something than they are. And their willingness to acknowledge it and then publicly state it in front of people who maybe are strangers. Because we have organizational legitimacy, but now I've given legitimacy to an individual in my organization with people they serve. And it doesn't matter if you're in law enforcement, if you're in production, if you're in engineering, whatever it is that you're in, that type of acknowledgement goes a long way to that person becoming the future you that the leader saw in the first place.
That's right. And I think that sometimes people are afraid to give that sort of support or feedback because they think somehow it's going to diminish their leadership capacity, or people are going to think less of them because they don't know everything. The reality is, and we all know this to be true, nobody likes a know-it-all. We all know when somebody's doing, that fake it till you make it. We can spot the person who's faking most of the time. And so you gain so much credibility, right? Where there's an irony in that we think it's going to do harm to us if we admit that we don't know something. And the reality is it actually bolsters your credibility when you say, I don't know, but hey, I have this person on my team, right? There's a real magic in that. And then there's a brilliance in that. And people go, wow, okay, he doesn't know everything, but he's got a team of people, and together the team knows everything. Every person on the team makes the whole team look good, which makes all the individuals look good when you've done it right.
And there's a great quote by John Wooden that I'll butcher, but basically his thing was, the individual success should come from the team success. Individual successes should contribute to the team success. I got to go back to the meeting thing again, because I think there's an important point here. I think it's important for leaders coming into a new position or to a new organization to find those quick, easy wins, the low-hanging fruit, if you will. Mm-hmm. I would be willing to bet that nobody was happier about the change in the number of meetings, the standing meetings that took place, their number being reduced than the people that had to attend them. Was that the case?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, so that's an easy win, and it's one of those things. But I would also be willing to, because you and I, we've talked on several occasions here, I would be willing to bet that if your team had laid out clear and concise reasons why those meetings were needed, that you wouldn't have just eliminated them for the sake of eliminating them. You're taking the easy wins, but also being able to acknowledge when my perceptions were wrong, especially when you're new coming in. I think that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that's right. And it actually was the case that we kept many of those meetings, right? There were things that stayed as folks said, hey, no, this is actually really important. Or, hey, this is a great time where we collaborate in this way. It was exactly that. It was about informing my understanding just as much as it was freeing up, because in those same conversations said, this one's really important. But hey, I'd be okay if I got some of my time back and we didn't have to do this one. And that's what we're trying to do. As leaders, I think sometimes maybe we fixate on what the biggest problem is or how to solve the monumental challenges. And those are really important. And we have to do those, no doubt. But as a new leader in an organization, I think, to your point, one of the first and most impactful things we can do are the small changes that affect people day to day.
Speaking of affecting people day to day, I would like for you to tell me a little bit about what CRI-TAC does, because CRI-TAC, when used, it can impact not only an organization, a police organization day to day, but also the community they serve. So what's CRI-TAC all about?
Yeah, so CRI-TAC is the Collaborative Reform Initiative Technical Assistance Center. And so we are one of three parts of the Collaborative Reform Initiative. And it is a collaboration between the COPS office, which is the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, and the IACP to deliver training and technical assistance at no cost to police agencies around the country. And what that means in practice is that if you're an agency in Alabama who needs to develop an officer safety and wellness unit, or you're an agency in California that wants to change your active shooter or active threat response protocols, we're going to take your request. We're going to connect you with subject matter experts on that topic who are also uniquely situated for your organization to put together a customized, a tailored training and technical assistance program for your organization. And the result is that you're not getting a cookie cutter training off the shelf. You're not in a 20-person agency trying to apply something that the NYPD is doing for their 40,000 member organization, right? We're really about for the field, by the field. So our subject matter experts are our current practitioners, maybe recently retired, some academic folks, but people who are doing the work or have very recently done the work and can inform how your agency goes about solving problems. And ultimately, it's about building stronger police agencies that are better prepared to meet the needs of their communities.
I love the part there. You already have experts identified. And I think that's so incredibly important because I going back to the internet experts, the ones that you don't like to argue with. It's funny to me when I see people post on social media, hey, I'm looking for somebody to come and, an addition on my house. If you've got any suggestions, and they're putting it out to a large group of people who have the same amount of knowledge that they do. I think that having an available pool of experts available, and not just a pool of experts, but you mentioned that it's practitioners and academics, because I'm a big believer in academics, because academics research, it provides credibility and defensibility to what the practitioners do. And whatever profession you're in, we need that type of leading that takes us down the right path so we're not continually making mistakes over and over again.
Yeah, that's right. We want folks to be able to learn from what took place, good and bad, in other organizations, right? And so what we're trying to do is facilitate the flow of information and share that. We're so fortunate that we've got a cadre of experts that are not just drawn from the IACP rosters. We're partnered with 8 other professional organizations, everybody from the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, the FBI National Academy Associates, International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators, Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training, NOBLE, NOLI, the National Tactical Officers Association. We've got all of these partners who are part of us, the National Sheriff's Association even, who have experts in their own fields and disciplines. And all of those sort of exist in a database that was constantly growing so that we can say, okay, who is an expert in campus law enforcement, response to hate crimes, math demonstrations, right? And pull together those folks. And that's exactly what we did a couple of weeks ago as we saw protests across the country on college campuses. Within a week, we turned around a webinar series for campus law enforcement agencies to be able to attend and receive information on mass demonstration response. And that's the power of CRI-TAC, is able to be responsive to real-time needs of organizations and deliver resources that empower them to make good decisions.
It's nice when we can learn from somebody else's mistakes. Too often we make it so we have to learn from our mistakes. And NASA actually has this newsletter that they put out on a regular basis where they invite and encourage people in the aviation industry to send in stories of near misses they had. And the idea is not, it's not to make a comedy film of biggest bloopers or whatever, but it's so that others can recognize the mistakes that have been made and what needs to be done in order to not to make them. And by having a broad base of experts like you have, you've got practitioners, NTOA, FOP represents the practitioners, but you've got campus law enforcement, because those really are the people that are experts on dealing with big events, because they've got football games and other sporting events. They've got graduations.
Yeah, that's right.
So they're policing. Yeah, policing's different there than it is in a rural sheriff's office. But a rural sheriff's office has got experience in responding when you're the only car working. How do you handle things? So would you agree, because you're also an academic, in addition to being a practitioner, would you agree that a broad pool of information to build proper responses, no matter what industry you're in, is the best possible of all scenarios?
Absolutely. The reason that I pursued a PhD is because I felt pretty strongly as it applied to policing. I felt like police in many cases do a pretty good job of listening to the academics, but I felt strongly that the academics weren't necessarily listening to the expertise of practitioners. What I have found to be truer over time is that cops want to be responsive to the information we get from academics, but there's a problem in translation, right? You're not going to get a lot of police chiefs who have time to sit and read a 75 or 100 page research article and go through the methods section and understand all the pieces of it. And so a magic in being able to inform that. So I think academics have a responsibility to make their theory and research accessible and meaningful to the field of any field, any discipline. We got to translate these 100-page research studies into a page or two of what it means for the industry and the organization and how they should apply it. And at the same time, industry experts, and we'll stick with policing, need to be going to academics and saying, okay, I hear your theory, but here's what it looks like at 3 a.m. on Tuesday. And here's the resources that are available to us during that time. And so all of the things you wrote about are closed during that time. So what do we do now? And I think that inspires good research. So in any industry, I think all of the leaders should be collaborating with the academic experts in their fields to inform what types of research are being done and how that translates to their day-to-day work.
I think it's also important for the academic side to be going to the practitioners and saying what research needs to be done. I always enjoy when you read an academic article where they talk about needed research. Hey, here are our blind spots. Here's what we don't know. And their willingness to express that to me is so, and you brought it up earlier, saying I don't know isn't a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. And I think that if we as a society became much more comfortable with saying, I don't know, I think we'd be much better off as a society.
I think you're right. And, it's interesting to me. I think we live in a time where everybody feels like not only do people feel like they are entitled to an opinion, everybody feels like they have to have an opinion. I think that's one of the byproducts of social media, right? Folks, there's like almost, I remember a couple of years ago, somebody sending me a text message. They were angry that I had not commented on social media about something that was happening in the world. And it was just astonishing to me that this one person cared, right, what my opinion was and thought that I was supposed to put it on Facebook for the world to read. And so I think that you're right. There's a real magic, a real benefit to society and certainly to your business if we get people in the habit of saying, I don't know, right? And then maybe the other half of the sentence for leaders is, but I will find out, right? Or we will find out together.
Even better. But I think there are times too where we have to be able to say also, I don't care.
Sure.
I don't care what this person wears. I don't care what they're serving for dinner. That stuff, if it has no direct impact on me as an individual or on my profession, then I should be able to say that. I have to ask a favor of you. We have an episode page for each of our episodes where we put links to things that we've talked about. I would love it if you'd send us some links talking about both CRI-TAC and IACP as an organization. Would love to share that with our listeners. But if I could, I would just want to go through some points to wrap up. So some of the highlights and some action items, if you will, for the listeners. Number one, if you want to be successful as a leader, it's important that you have direct, genuine conversation to increase your legitimacy internally so that you can have legitimacy externally. Please correct me if I misstate any of these.
No, you nailed it.
All right. The next one I have that I think that our aspiring leaders and current leaders need to understand is that you must be comfortable in having to make people uncomfortable, not for the sake of making them uncomfortable, but in meeting organizational needs and also growing the person that you're working with.
That's right. You don't get to be a jerk, but you can stretch people and help and grow and develop them.
All right. And then I think another one was be intentional about seeing the future employee, looking at the people that you work with, that work for you, and being able to say, where do they have the capacity to be 2 years from now? And what role do I play in getting them there?
Yeah, especially that last part. How are you going to help them get to where you think that they've got the ability to be?
I've just got a couple more here. If you're a leader and you're being brought into a new role, or you're being brought into a new organization, try to find some quick, small wins, to start building your legitimacy with the people that you're working with. Not just change for the sake of change and not doing it for the purpose of kissing butt and giving them everything they want, but legitimate wins that take you down the path that you're trying to go to, but they also see the victories in.
Yeah. Target the things that are going to make a day-to-day difference for those folks and make their lives, their jobs a little bit easier.
And then finally, and this was based on your personal experience right here, aspiring leaders should be looking to broaden their experience, to increase both the breadth and depth of their experience, because you never know when it's going to become important to you later, as did your investigation stint.
Yeah, I can't stress that enough, right? Be open to learning new things.
You know, it's funny. It doesn't even have to be related to what you're doing. Just the experiences and the people that you come in contact with oftentimes will serve you well in your position.
Absolutely, they will. Absolutely, they will.
Well, David, it has certainly been a pleasure having you on. I've enjoyed the conversation. For our listeners, total transparency, I talked to our guests beforehand to get an idea of where their passion is, they want to talk about, because it's not just what I want to talk about. And David, I enjoyed our conversation today, but I also have enjoyed our previous conversation. So thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. I hope it's helpful.
Well, for my listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed the episode, and as I say every week, I sure as heck hope you did, please be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast provider. You can also check us out on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. As we close, remember this, folks, be the leader you wish you had.